Hi, welcome to our webinar about differentiation in the orchestra classroom. My name is Shawn Morton, and I'm your community moderator for the orchestra community for Georgia Department of Education. So we're talking about differentiation. We're going to first talk about what does that look like in the orchestra classroom. Then we're going to talk about how we can use student data to drive our differentiation. And finally, we're going to talk about how differentiation in our classroom fits into the TEAC standards that we use here in Georgia for evaluation. So first, what does differentiation look like in our orchestra classrooms? We're going to first talk about how do we know what differentiation is? Well, oftentimes we have students at all different levels. Sometimes our students are really getting the material and they're right on target. Sometimes we have kids that are way ahead. Other times we have kids that are way behind, and often they're all in the same room. Differentiation is really addressing the needs of all learners. And our job as teachers is to always take the needs of all students, plan our lessons carefully, and consider reaching every level of students. So we're always working on moving students from whatever level they're at to a higher level, whether they're struggling learners or whether they're advanced learners. And we do that using rigor. And so rigor is really getting students to move to those higher levels and creating our materials so that we can reach those higher levels in Bloom's taxonomy, as well as creating materials that use higher level thinking in the depth of knowledge system. So if you think about depth of knowledge level 1, these can be really simple, straightforward questions like, what's a tie? Or how many beats does a quarter note get? But if students then have to synthesize that data and teach it back to you or do some sort of an interactive project, then they're using those skills and applying it. And so that's what we're really trying to create with rigor. Differentiation can be used to address different learning styles, can be used to address different ability levels, and sometimes physical, mental, emotional, and cognitive abilities. Sometimes we can really see differences in students. Their needs are really obvious, and other times it's more hidden. Oftentimes for us, we're really luckily in the string world. It's pretty easy to see if a kid isn't bowing in the right direction or if their left hand isn't right, but other times it's harder. If kids are working on key signatures and it's a written activity, sometimes we may not be able to see across the room right away if they're not getting it. And so really investigating through different modes and methods to figure out who needs that extra attention or how we can differentiate to make sure each kid is getting that targeted instruction. So next we're going to talk about how to differentiate. There's 3 ways that we can differentiate really. We can do it for content, like what do we want the students to know? And we do that by varying the modalities, meaning hearing, seeing, doing. We can give information orally, we can give it visually or tactile. We can present content in incremental steps. We're really great at this in music. So much of what we do is spiraling and building on previous content knowledge. And sometimes we have content knowledge that has gaps, and we have to go back and fill those gaps and move back in the steps. And then finally, for content, we can talk about offering learners of choice and complexity. So sometimes we have students that are ready to move ahead, but other students are not. And so offering choice so that they can meet where they need to be to move to the next level of understanding. You can also differentiate with process. What do we want them to be able to do? So flexible groupings are great for this, and also using incentives to learn based on a student's interest or their level of understanding. So, sometimes we can use similar groupings of ability, or sometimes we can use flexible groupings like high level students can work with lower level students and do some partner activities like that. Finally, we can vary by product. What do we want them to create? Often for us, we're creating a final product like a concert or a playing test or some kind of final product, but we can often vary assessment types or methods leading up to that, giving students choice boards and other activities we're going to talk about a little further on in this webinar, and challenging each student at his or her own level with content that's at their level and even sometimes just a little bit above so that they want to know more. And then allowing students to have some freedom of choice sometimes in what they're learning is really helpful, and choice in how they create that final product. So first we can talk about differentiation by learning style. Learning style is often used in teaching. We talk about this all the time. We have visual learners, we have oral learners, we have kinesthetic or tactile learners. Our visual learners want to see things, our oral learners need to hear it, and our kinesthetic or tactile learners need to do it. The great thing about music is this is such a natural fit for us. So demonstrating things multiple ways for your students. So as many different ways as you can show a concept, talk about a concept, let students experience a concept is going to help really hit all those different learning styles. So you definitely want to go through all those processes. And then, for example, so let's say we're teaching two-note slurs. That's a great beginning skill that we do. You can talk about slurs. You can tell students, okay, a slur is where we play two notes, or in this case, we're talking about two-note slurs, but we can play two or more notes on one bow and one bow direction. So we can go through the explanation. Next, we can show it by modeling. So we would model the two-note slur with the bowing. We can also show the symbols on the page, what it looks like. A lot of kids, that's really helpful to see it also on the page. Then if we want them to experience it, we can have them do it. We can have them air bow it. So D, E, D, E, saying two-note names while moving the bow one direction. We can do an activity on paper where we use little macaroni noodles and create two-note slurs with little macaroni noodles. And again, that gives those tactile learners something experiential, either physically doing it, creating the slurs with little macaroni noodles, or if you don't want to use macaroni in your classroom, little pencil markings. So again, just giving students different options to hit their different learning styles. Most of us use multiple learning styles, but certain kids really have a strong tendency towards one or the other. So making sure that students get those experiences. In general, students always remember best what they do. So anytime we can incorporate things that they're doing, we're going to get better long-term results. Next, we can differentiate by ability level or their capabilities, meaning learning level or just where they are in the process. So there's so many ways in music that we do this and we do it well. And I'm sure you have some great ones. I'm really excited to hear about that hopefully this month in our chats. But, giving alternates to parts. So meaning, okay, let's say that this particular passage in music is a bunch of eighth notes. So maybe they just play the first of every measure. They just play beat one, next measure beat one, or maybe they play the first of each set of two, or maybe it's a bunch of repeated sixteenths and they can't play it, so maybe they just play one, 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 so they just play the downbeat. Different options like that, modifying parts for them or simplifying things to help students. That's a great way to differentiate for ability level. Also creating mentoring opportunities. So partnering kids with kids that are maybe stronger players, a weaker and stronger, gives them that ability to see somebody that's a little bit ahead. And it also helps that student that's a little bit ahead reach out, help another student, and it hones their skills too. Creating chamber ensembles, same idea. You can create groups based on likability. You can have some strong players, some weaker players. But again, you're breaking it down into smaller pieces, getting students in smaller groupings, and then they can really listen and work together. Sectionals are great for this, so you're grouping more by instrument type. And again, we're just doing pullouts or getting smaller groups, breaking down the process. Creating easier or simplified parts. So much like creating or giving kids alternatives to their music, actually creating a simplified version for kids. Sometimes we have students in our classroom that really have severe learning disabilities or severe learning needs. And sometimes we need to give them an actual modified part, meaning we've taken out some of the material for them because it's too much for them to read. Or maybe sometimes we've reduced the part down to just the baseline. So again, providing students with those types of things to help them. Programming music with improv sections. So maybe you have a student that just is not a good reader, but maybe they're great at making up stuff. And so, if your group can play a simple piece that has a little opportunity for a made up solo, what a great way to engage that student. And then allowing for solos or feature repertoire. So let's say you have a hotshot violinist, a kid that's really ahead of the game. Great opportunity for a solo. Or you have a really killer cello section. All the kids in your cello section are magical. So that's a great way to feature the cellos. Find a piece like Cello Pudding or Cello Zole and feature that group in your pieces. Providing alternative focus points. So giving the kids different things to focus on. They don't only have to worry about this part of the music or this skill, but giving them other things to also think about. So sometimes we only are talking about working on left hand fingering, but maybe we have kids in our class that have previous experience. So maybe we can give them something else to work on. Or maybe we're really working on adding pinky, fourth fingers, but maybe we have kids that have previous experience. Maybe their focus point becomes shifting. And then doing other modifications for students, things like finger tapes. A lot of people have strong feelings about that. I think finger tapes work for a lot of kids. It's especially helpful if you have a kid that's having problems with the fingerboard geography, note names, any kind of location activity to help them, writing in note names. Again, wouldn't recommend it for every kid, but if you have a learner that's particularly struggling, you can color code. There's all kinds of options and ways we can differentiate by ability level or their capability. Finally, in this section of orchestra differentiation, I loved this quote. Differentiation is not individualized instruction. It does not require a dozen lesson plans to meet one learning objective. Instead, teachers look for shared characteristics among students within a class in order to group students in a way that make the most of the learning experience. So you don't need to write 8 lesson plans because you have 8 types of learners in your classroom. Instead, it's coming up with ways to reinforce material different ways and using different strategies so that we hopefully hit all those different groups. It's really important to know who's in your room. What will work in my second period class does not work with my first period class. There are very different types of learners in those 2 classes. One group is also way more awake than the other. And so finding strategies that work with my students. For first period, I have to do activities that have those kids up and moving because they're so sleepy. So it has to be very tactile, very kinesthetic. Otherwise, they're asleep. Fifth period, a little different. And so, again, knowing your group, what will work well for them, and realizing you don't need to have an individual plan for every kid. And it's not a private lesson, but instead using strategies that will work for the whole group and maybe will target certain types of learners or experiences.